Are online groups hurting the future of the theater organ? Have history lessons mid-concert disrupted the flow? Are open consoles an open nightmare? This and much more with my panel of the future generation of the theater organ on this episode of From the Chambers. Welcome to the second episode of From the Chambers. I've brought back the panel for part 2 of our discussion on the future of the theater organ, featuring Nathan Avakian, Luke Staisiunas, Seamus Gethicker, and Richie Gregory. Before we begin, I want to thank all of those who have reached out via email and comments, as well as those who have subscribed to this channel on YouTube. We are just scratching the surface with this project, and there seems to be an interest for this discussion. If you think you can help out, please drop me a note, and I look forward to hearing from you. Now, let's dive back in with our panel. Guys, thank you again for joining me on the show. We had a really great discussion last time, and a lot of things came out of that we wanted to elaborate more on. So I'm glad that we have this opportunity to go through a little bit more in detail some of the other thoughts that came up after recording the first episode. So I want to get right to it. Do the theater organ groups help or hurt the discussion? And by that, I mean, are we talking about like the Facebook groups and other discussion groups that exist in the theater organ community? There's a lot of back and forth with people who are professionals, with amateurs, hobbyists, and enthusiasts. And a lot of information comes out and a lot of misinformation comes out as well. So the question is does this help or hurt the theater organ community?
I would say that inside the organ world, I think discussion, it's going to happen. It's politics. It's with any hobby or group that anything consists of. Everything has politics. It's going to happen within people who are sharing the knowledge of a topic. As far as outside groups and expanding the interest in the theater organ, I don't think it really hurts because a lot of people don't realize that there's an organ world or organ community of people that are just knowing each and other organist. So I would say that it's not necessarily hurting the topic. I think that some people's toes can get stepped on if they're that well invested in it, but I don't think it's hurting the promotion of the instrument.
I agree. It's kind of like, no publicity is bad publicity. I think it's, if there's a lot of discussion that really is only good. I mean, there's probably instances where things are being discussed that maybe aren't being discussed in a very thoughtful way that could be damaging to our reputation as
But one of the things I see happen a lot is somebody comes in with a question, a thought, an idea, and suddenly the community sort of just jumps on it in the worst of ways. And I think it casts a negative shadow on what the group is like.
That is a better way of saying what I was just trying to say. I think in those instances, I think there's a lot to be said for how we have our discussions, but I think that the fact that discussions are happening is good.
Yes, I think the fact that it's happening is really important, because if it's not happening, then what's the point of even having the discussion in the first place?
I also think it's easy for some of us who have been in the organ world for a while. I mean, I haven't been in there too long, but some other people that have been in for a long time. It's easy to forget that most people, like 99% of people, have no idea how an organ works or anything. So I think it's important to welcome what we might view as elementary questions and encourage it and answer them.
But I think it's safe to say that you're not going to see the outside community looking in on this. So I don't foresee somebody coming off the street, so to speak, logging onto Facebook and searching the theater organ group.
No, but there's a mixture of people, because I do think there's a lot of people that are very new to the instrument, don't know a lot about it, but become very invested, very interested, and join these groups and ask questions, and maybe are not really welcomed by members that just really want to debate. So I see that point, Seamus. I think we do need to be sensitive to people that are new and maybe not as familiar with all of the political debates that are going on.
I think it's important too. It's just like anything. You want to be polite. If someone comes along, you want to be as polite as possible. You don't want to offend them or be like, well, look at me, I know this. Or, because, like you guys both said, it's keeping an open consciousness that not everybody is as up to par as you are with information. And if you want to come across as a attractive group or person, or you want people to enjoy what you're doing.
And there are some, I would say, seasoned veterans of the group and other groups, because there's at least a dozen, if not more, theater organ groups online. I think there are some people that stand out as ambassadors to these groups and are very level-headed when it comes to questions that may be very new and amateur, and people just want to gain information. And luckily there are the people who will take the time to thoroughly write something and to put it all out there for a new person to read.
Yeah, I think we also need to be, obviously we need to be open to new ideas as the art form as we know it is struggling. And I think there, I'm not online in these groups a lot, but I've read plenty of things where, somebody writes in about an idea they have for an organ or for a specification or something. And it's not conventional. It's not typically what's been done. And a lot of people will pounce on them and be like, no, you don't do that. It's going to sound horrible for this reason. And this is how Wurlitzer did it. And this is why. And that's the only way to do it. And I really think that there's a lot of good ideas out there that might come from people that have no idea how it's supposed to be done. And it may be worth having discussions in those cases and like asking people, why do you think that? Like, this is how it's been done before, but why do you think that would be better, instead of just shutting it down because it's not traditional?
So in that kind of situation, you're dealing with maybe somebody who, from whatever way possible, have acquired an instrument and they're looking for advice on how to either restore it, hook it up together, whatever it might be. And they take pictures of it, they share it and say, wow, look at the thing that I have, or look what I accomplished today in my project. And then you have an area where you have, then you have the situation where you end up with the professionals and then the hobbyists. And that's where I think a lot of the disconnect happens, because you have seasoned professionals who maintain instruments across the country versus people who may just tinker with it and it happens to work.
I think that what you bring up an interesting point there. We have professionals and we have the amateurs. I think it's safe to say we all know somebody or a group of people who hasn't necessarily done things the correct way when it comes to maintaining an organ or whatever they do with the organ. I think it's important that in order to prevent that going forwards into the future, it's important to be polite to those who we are looking out towards. And I think it's important to take a few extra seconds, like you said earlier, and comment some information, be sure that we educate people and set a good path and example for people to naturally follow by, or else there are going to be people out there.
Yeah, and there's room for everybody. I think there's people who, have an interest, enjoy doing this just as a hobby, and there are people that want to be professional or are professionals, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. I think it's important to acknowledge the two different mentalities, because there's certainly a lot of people who are, producing concerts or trying to do professional things, but they do it in a way that seems very amateur, like it's just a hobby. Mm-hmm. So I think there's room for everybody, but we should acknowledge the differences between those two mentalities.
There is room for everybody, and it's important to say, especially here, that what we're trying to say is that there are correct ways of doing things, and there are also ways of exploring the process of doing things, and that in this case, it's better to do something than to not do something at all. The fact that somebody may have acquired an instrument and they're trying to figure out how to make it work is better than it landing in a dumpster.
And to bounce off of Nathan a little bit, with there being room for everyone, say, for example, there's a chapter project. There are some professionals out there that say that volunteer work is bad and all this. But volunteer work is very great, and it encourages people, and it helps a lot. But at the same time, you can also have a professional sort of guiding everyone and just kind of pointing everyone in the right direction as to what to do.
Right, especially when you get these groups of people who kind of, I guess, stumble into the theater organ by accident almost. Like you see these people where they get an organ for their home, or, you know, groups where they happen to be the recipient of an instrument and they just want information about how to best go forward. And it's like, there's enthusiasm which can sort of yield results ranging from the horrific to, you know, better than new. And it's just great when you see these projects online and they kind of keep up morale as they go along through the kind of trudging through the trenches work of, you know, getting an instrument from a trailer full of rotting wood to a musical instrument that people can do concerts on.
When it comes to a theater that is either acquiring or installing, or a group is installing, basically bringing a performance level instrument into its space, there's a lot of conversation about what has happened in the past. Some chapters may not have done it the right way, or a way that is accepted amongst a majority of professional organ builders. Some instruments get parted out and put in very interesting ways where you have ranks from all kinds of different organs being placed into the chambers. So how does that discussion, where you have people who want to be purists and want that opus number to go as one giant thing into the space, versus a collection of parts, or maybe not many, but a few different variations, or just to spice it up a little, enhancements? Because I've seen a lot of conversations where a theater is mentioned and they say, oh, this was a 216 and it was wonderful, and now they made it into a 455. And everyone goes, well, they never should have done that, and it ruined it, and everything else like that. So what to do with that kind of mentality, with that kind of conversation?
I think is important. Like a couple of them already said, you know, the instrument could be in the trash. I think I'm just going to put my opinion forward. I think that whatever you do with an instrument, as long as it sounds good and it plays well, I think it has a wonderful outcome. I think that's great. And organs, you know, it's like, oh, well, I have 20 ranks of Kimball sitting here and I'd love for it to stay intact, or else it's going into the dump. It's probably going to go in the dump because people aren't calling people up going, hey, I want a 1924 Kimball installed in this new building I'm building. It's not, the market isn't there anymore. So I think that it's great that whatever home these instruments are finding, whatever the home the pipework is finding.
Yeah, it's obviously painful for any of us that care about the instrument to see history lost, whether that's like you know, an iconic installation get parted out,
yes,
or an instrument that we love and maybe is nostalgic to us because we've heard it before, changing in some way. Like it's difficult, but I think we're very quick to be angry and pessimistic because we've seen that so much, that it is easy to just jump straight to that reaction instead of acknowledging how great it is that somebody wants to use the parts at all.
It's almost like we need to be celebrating anything rather than complaining about something that's not being done.
Right. And in many cases, I think enlargement projects, or even if an organ gets parted out, like if those parts can have a positive impact somewhere else, make organs more suited to their venues or to the purpose that they have, you know, in my mind, that's okay if we compromise a little bit on historical preservation to make the instruments that we have more playable and more effective.
I think one of the unique things about the organ is that it's such a universal instrument. And by that, it's not like a piano where you take it and it's like, okay, the piano's permanent. You're not going to add another rank of strings or anything. It's just how it is. Whereas the organ, it can constantly morph. It can grow, it can get bigger, it can get smaller. You can take parts of it and chunk it up to another instrument like plants. You can just break them in half. The organ there's so many possibilities, and it's just constantly changing. And I have never thought of it.
And at the end of the day, sort of getting into a more technical, mechanical sense, it comes down to the room that it's in and how well the voices meld with each other. Because if you're going to take a Austin French horn and mix it with a Kimball string in a room that's only 10 by 10, well, I don't know what you're expecting to get from that. Maybe Luke can find a way to make it work, because I mean, I feel like Luke's going to be the one who does that.
Well, I do have a storage unit full of a chest from a parted out organ, actually. But sort of when we did the Kilgan project a few years ago, we actually did get hate mail, like a printed and mailed letter to the museum telling them that they were destroying history by allowing alterations to this instrument, where preserving it as it was in the radio studio just was literally not possible, because when the architect drew the organ chambers, they were a certain size, and that's all the space there was. So there was no way to recreate it as it was when, Jesse Crawford played it in 1935, where, the goal of the museum was to take what was literally a pile of parts in a railway depot, like it was a heap, more or less, and they wanted an instrument which would have all the Kilgan pipework, so it would still sound like it did, but would be, practical for concert artists in the 21st century. So with a, modern combination action, you can unplug the cable, you can use the MIDI player so you can go and listen to yourself. But, their goal was to have a musical instrument, not just another artifact.
That reminds me of an organ that I've been involved with. And it's an original 3-manual Wurlitzer, original specification. And it took probably about a year for everyone to agree to change the solo to great 8-foot coupler, make it a sub-octave, so you have more 16s. And I think, and like echoing what Luke said, it's important to think, do you want a museum piece, or do you want something to actually play? That someone actually enjoys playing. Having a Wurlitzer, an 11-rank Wurlitzer with no tibia mutations and almost no 16s, it's neat historically, but you can still have that physically, but you can modernize it a bit to suit the 21st century.
Yeah, I'd rather have hundreds of really well-designed contemporary instruments that are like playable and musical and suited to the needs of current artists and trends, and read about what original installations were like in a textbook, then have a handful of original installations that are not capable of meeting current needs of the industry. I think the only way that we have a future for this instrument in terms of public knowledge and appreciation is if we allow those changes to happen, because the alternative is just not interesting to me.
And there are opportunities where significant instruments in history can be preserved in a certain state. I would argue, for example, Long Island University is frozen in time. The Brooklyn Paramount Wurlitzer is frozen in time. There's very, very minor modifications that have been done, but mostly to make sure that it keeps running. But 98% of that organ is exactly the same organ that went in years ago, almost 100 years ago now. And while we hope that that instrument will continue to play, I can't speak for that's future, but there's something very special about the uniqueness of that instrument being the size that it is, but also mechanically how it's still doing what it's been designed to do all these years. But then you take something else that may not be as modern as it can be, but has the opportunity to be expanded to fit the needs of performers today. I would weigh the case of whether or not you have to go and change a lot, especially in the spec or in the combination action, for example, but the core of the instrument is still going to be there, and that's what is the whole point of this in the first place, is to have the instrument there.
Yeah, it's almost like, should the instrument evolve to meet the needs of performers, or should the performers tailor their playing to suit the instruments? Because I'm hearing a lot of people that maybe will be watching this video saying, well, the way that things were done originally is fine. Artists just need to use it. Like, it's musical, it's going to serve the purpose. There's no need to change it so that we can be spoiled with 10,000 pistons if we want them. But I would argue that it does influence playing. There are certainly many pieces that I've arranged that I do not play when I go somewhere that has a original combination action. And I could hear people saying artists today are just spoiled, but the instrument does not need all of those new things. And I agree that musically it's not, it changes things, but from an artist's perspective, it's so much more liberating to play an instrument that has, uniflex, and I can customize anything I want to get any sound that I want. It absolutely influences the type of music that we can and should play.
And that's a huge thing, I think, because when as a performer you sit down at the console, you know what you want to do with your music. You know how you want to perform, and you know what you want to offer the audience. You don't want the instrument to prevent you from being able to artistically contribute that way. You don't want to be held back because you only have 4 pistons and that's your show. It's not to say that as a performer you cannot figure that out, that the organ is useless and that why am I even here? But when we're trying to take an instrument of almost 100 years and let's even go further than that. I mean, like the organ in general, theater organ and pipe organ in general, when you're trying to find a new creative way of getting that message across, to introduce people to a music form that they have not really appreciated or maybe even never heard before, you have to use everything possible to get that message across. And if that means that the console needs to have 100 pistons or fully customizable tabs that change suddenly from one version to another version, that's the tool in your toolbox that you are using as a performer to get that message across, to bring the music to the people in a different way.
That reminds me of, I'm sure we've all heard it, how many times we've heard a good woodworker doesn't blame their tools. Maybe that's true then, I don't do woodwork. But in this case, it's not true at all. I mean, it's just not true.
In 1930, if organists came up with a way that they wanted to use the instrument that was more effective in accompanying silent films or whatever the use of that instrument was, and manufacturers had the ability to modify the instrument to suit those needs, they absolutely would have done it. So for us to limit ourselves to the specifications that were developed by an industry that doesn't exist anymore is just silly to me, and is less authentic than if we continued in this with the same spirit of innovation and took the needs of artists and contemporary audiences and modified the instrument in whatever way we could to meet those needs.
And I've always sort of thought of this as it's a bit of a give and take, given that every organ is sort of a different palette of colors that we have to use. But even thinking of organs I've played, like the Rahway Theater in New Jersey, it's not quite original. It's had a few very minor alterations that make it a lot more useful for performers today. Like during the last chamber work, they added a separate tibia tremulant. Before it was the tibia and trumpet together, and now they're separate. And at some point they added couplers to it, so you can kind of get the larger ensembles we're expecting. But it's like, I wouldn't ever want to see an organ like that made larger than it is, because that organ is only ever played for silent films and just needs to do that and nothing else. But then when it comes to studio organs, that's kind of where people can go hog wild and just fully express what they want to do, like the Carmex organ in San Filippo and Organ Stop, where it's kind of people creating their own palette of colors that's similar tonally to what people would have heard in the 20s, but it's kind of at a scale that nobody would have ever thought of.
Yeah, it kind of, in my mind, it kind of honors the history of the instrument in general, that we are so inspired by its sound that we want to do that. We want to build them bigger and different and show them to the public. I mean, that's what Organ Stop is all about, is what is going to excite the listeners. I think that's one of the best ways we can pay tribute to the art form.
A question that was brought into the inbox for the show, and anyone can email us at any time, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, and thank you for sending this in, is as performers, should you be giving a history lesson behind the pieces that you're playing? Does that interrupt the flow of the concert to have mini lectures in between pieces?
Oh, I really like it when people kind of give a little bit of information or tell a story about a piece. It helps connect me, the listener, to what the artist is doing. Or if it's like an unfamiliar song, because sure, like American songbook stuff, you don't really need to tell anybody about it because that's kind of common knowledge. But if it's, a folk tune or a lesser known piece that has an interesting lyric or something, I find that interesting to know. Or if there's a connection to the organ itself, like if, I don't know, Ella Fitzgerald sang at some theater and you're going to sing one of her songs that she made famous. I kind of like those little connections.
I think when speaking in a concert is most effective, it's when it shows the artist's personality and gives them an opportunity to connect with the audience. And one great way for that to happen is for the artist to share what they find interesting about the music. Which is like a window into how they view their music. And many times, for many artists, that is because of the history of the piece or the significance of the instrument. It's not effective if the artist doesn't really care about that and they just do it because that's the expected format. Then it becomes more of like a recital where it's very like structured and educational. So, my advice to other performers based on my experience would be only share what you want to share because it's only share what you are passionate about to give for the purpose of giving the audience a window into your passion and your personality. There's no need to give history lessons for the sake of education in programs.
I'm about to go into sort of how do we get newer people interested, but if there's like newer people in the audience or maybe someone new, giving a history lesson is just going to turn them off. It's just not interesting to new people as much as we might like it.
Yeah, and the people that are interested in it are just eventually going to find that information themselves. Like we only have things to lose if we include a lot of history in the programs. So
what would the balance of something like that be? Is it to acknowledge the piece that you're playing's history in music? So this piece was performed in 1938 at the Paramount Theater in Times Square, New York. I chose this because it makes me feel special. This instrument plays it very well. My arrangement takes a little from the history and adds a little to the new. Is something short and easy like that?
I think it's important that another thing it acknowledges who's your audience. Like Nathan said in the past discussion, is it a are you playing a pre-show at a theater, or are you playing a theater organ chapter social, or are you playing a 2-hour organ concert that's open to the public, or are you playing a quick tour of the theater concert, or what are you doing? If you're doing a theater organ social, I would say you would probably be more inclined to explain stuff because the audience would actually be interested, because this is the type of quirky stuff they care about. That's why they're here. As opposed to if you're playing a public 1-hour, 2-hour concert where you have a decent amount of people who don't know anything about an organ, they maybe keep it more short and simple. And like what was just said, if they actually care about the piece, they'll figure out more about it on their own.
This is going to be a little more controversial, and I'm just going to get right to it. What's not working for the theater organ?
A lot.
I think, yeah, that's a loaded question. I think recycled material and styles is probably one of the biggest things. I think we hear the same pieces over and over and over again because we love them and they're iconic and they're nostalgic for many of the audience members. in that sense, I think there's some resistance to change, because it seems like incorporating newer things means we're going to get less of the things that we know and love in the programs. But it's a trade-off, because that's the only way we're going to get new people interested in large numbers.
And a lot of how it's presented isn't really conducive to sort of attracting people to show up. If like a local theater has an organ and the only time it ever gets played is when there's a chapter open console at, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the morning on the third Saturday of the month, like, people aren't going to show up to that. Or if it's a concert that's put on and there's no production value put into it, when you walk in with the work lights and I guess somebody meanders up to the bench and they play, it kind of really undersells it as a legitimate source of entertainment. Because like you go to a piano concert or a vocal recital, they at least will have a program that tells you who's playing, what's happening, and they'll dim the lights before you start, so it's not kind of well, here we go. And when it's at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, nobody who would be looking for things to do on a weekend is gonna pitch up.
We are very much stuck in like a concert mentality, where we view not just that that's mostly what we do, because I understand it's difficult to like spearhead new efforts and find new and exciting ways of using the instrument because nobody knows about it. But it's a lot of people in this community kind of think of concerts as being the epitome of organ performance. And really, I think it's one of the least effective ways to use the theater organ. It's just the one that, most of us enjoy because it's nostalgic for us. So it's hard to break that mentality, but we really do need to think about the instrument. I think about ways like the International Youth Silent Film Festival, which I'm involved with, silent films in general, but like the way that the organ is used in Nathan Barr's studio, Enrica Studios, with like using it sonically as a member of an ensemble to create something. Like most people that go to see those films aren't going to know or care that there's an organ involved, but it's a really lucrative way of using the instrument. So I think we need to constantly be pushing ourselves to find and embrace new unconventional ways of using the instrument, and not just wish that everything was a concert.
That right there is the biggest issue with the organ, with the theater organ right now as it is, just how do we use the instrument? Because you have people debating over what the correct way is. You have the possibilities not being there right now, with restrictions, more recently so of COVID, but it's just a constant up in the air battle and discussion on, well, this isn't working, how do we change this? And that's the big discussion question. That's the $1 million question.
It is $1 million question. But now, okay, so speaking of finances, say a theater is allowing a chapter to get in to put on an event, whether it's an open console or a concert, but they're not going to give them, unless the chapter forks over money for production, any of the bells and whistles that would make it a stage show, that would make it attractive. Or, for example, the theater is only saying, well, we have a show coming in this evening, but you can have the morning free to do whatever you need to do. And an open console is sort of the quick and easy thing that somebody can pull off without a lot of spectacle. So it's important to know that there are probably chapters that may watch this show and are saying, hey, wait a minute, this is the best that we can do sometimes. Why are you alienating the thing that we're trying to do, when you were just talking about how we should be doing anything we can do to promote the theater organ?
I should be clear. I don't think that we should stop doing concerts. I think concerts are probably the most effective form of presentation for our membership groups, for the community of theater organ enthusiasts that love the instrument. It's a fantastic way to celebrate the music that we love. So I don't think we should stop doing concerts. I just think we should acknowledge that, it is a lot of work to produce them, and that I'm sure is a very common predicament, is that groups can get access to the instrument, but that's about it. They don't have the money to pull off a big spectacle of a production. And that's one of the reasons why we shouldn't focus all of our efforts in doing that, because it's never going to be up to the standard of performance as other contemporary artists that are like fresh and relevant in the music industry.
We talked a little bit about this in the last episode, but collaboration is super important. I think it can open up a lot of doors, perhaps in situations like this. And just it's tough to make an instrument known or your group known if you can't use the instrument. But finding ways to make it known and collaboration, I think, is really kind of the future.
Yeah, and that's what it was built for to begin with, was to sort of be the versatile, I guess, Swiss Army knife of instruments in theaters, where if you had a small orchestra, the organ was here to augment it. If you didn't have a budget for an orchestra, you'd play the film. And these days, that's a lot easier to pull off than it was back then, because we have 100 more years of music written for organ and orchestra, organ and band. Or even if you wanted to do something more adventurous, like we have a community theater group that wants to do a musical, the theater organ's a lot nicer to listen to than some MIDI backing track. But it all takes, people and money and just kind of the forethought to think of such things.
It would be something really interesting to see, is a musical on the stage accompanied by a theater organ. I know I have never seen that before, but I suddenly really, really want that to happen.
I mean, John Sang did it back in the 60s.
I think it would be a tremendous project, but like, yeah, it has so much potential. I can't even think of what musical I would want to have scored for theater organ or somebody to take on that challenge, but like the prospect of that sounds really amazing.
A big step would be towards that is to start having the organ used in pre-show for Broadway productions. So not having the console mowed over by props above and having it rise up, and you're playing pieces that are in the production. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what the legal hoops for that are, but I think that would be a huge step, is if you have if you have the organ come up and perfume the air with the music from the Broadway production.
Well, you have that now with the El Capitan Theater.
And the Atlanta Fox does pre-show music before all of their Broadway tours.
And the Redford in Detroit.
There's lots of examples. Yeah. And it's very successful.
As someone on one of the Facebook groups was talking about, they would plan it out. So when they had a classic film series in the summer, if they were doing musical movies, the pre-show music for I think they would use the music from the last film or the music from like the film that was happening the next week. So it was all kind of tied together.
That's a really great idea. I really like that. I think that's one of the key things that's going to change how the instrument is used. I wanted to quickly go back to open consoles. It's an interesting technique to get people in the theater and off the street. It's one where I've participated in a few before I was deeper involved in organizations. It's awkward. I'm just going to go right to it. It's incredibly awkward because you go into a space and you don't know who's going to be there. You don't know really what's going to happen. And there's a bit of a icebreaker that needs to happen, because you walk into the space and somebody is going to go, "Hi, where are you coming from?" Or "What brought you here?" Or what are you an organist, a hobbyist? Are you a spy? Did you get past security? Those kind of things end up happening. And then as a attendee, you're going, "Well, why am I here?" And you have a bunch of people sitting around, maybe passing stories, and maybe they're going to go up into the chamber, or maybe they can't go in the chamber because that's a liability, or that you can't take a group around, whatever it might be. Then you get the opportunity to maybe sit down at the console. And, one of the things that's billed is, sit down and try it out for yourself. See how it works. Understand what the stop tabs do and why there are 100 pedals and whatnot. And you sit there and you go, well, I don't know what I'm doing here. just wanted to get up close to this. Now what? And for some reason you decide to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and it's the worst thing you've ever heard in your life, and you jump off the stage. I mean, what do we do with open consoles that make it more inviting and attractive to a new audience?
I don't know how many times I have seen, say, just like a person off the street, a new person show up to one of these things, even just a concert, but especially open console. They show up and everyone just gathers around them and hounds on them. You know, like, oh, this played for silent films back in the 20s, and, it can do all this and this. And I've seen, especially if it's like a younger person, it'll be like, oh, well, the music this plays is good music. The music you listen to today is all crap or whatever, which is not true at all. But I know it's a lot most of it is out of enthusiasm, but we need to dial it back just a little bit. And if someone wants to come in and if they want to ask, like, hey, what was this for? Kind of go both ways. Don't just hound on them. And for example, if they sit down at a console, of course, don't expect an instant concert. That's not what this is for. And just give them their space. If they want help at the console, they'll say something, and maybe if they are playing it in a different way than what we're used to, don't complain and say, oh, this is how you're supposed to play. Let them experiment and play around and have fun.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We should never expect open console performances to be like concerts. I am so incredibly uncomfortable in those situations. Even if I am like the musical artist and I'm there to do a concert or something, I get very uncomfortable if I'm put on the bench outside of that concert, because I know that people are expecting me to make music. And honestly, I don't really find as much enjoyment in just like sitting down and jamming as I do in like meticulously planning out registration and crafting an arrangement. It's like a different style of performance, and everybody's going to come at it with a different interest and different strengths. And that really is what open consoles should be for, is letting people explore the instrument in whatever way is most beneficial or interesting to them. And that's not always slapping down a bunch of stops and playing a piece of music. I think about outside of like, open consoles within like organ groups. I think about events that I've done where there's young people, maybe like film festival screenings. And I always, whenever I can, announce that, after, if you want to get up close to the instrument and ask questions or learn more about it or even play it, maybe stick around after the show. And then usually there's a group of kids, and I'll like jump in and help them if they need help, but I just let them do whatever they want. And it sounds awful, because it's things like, how many keys can you press down at the same time? What's the loudest thing you can do? Like, they'll find like the siren, and that'll be the most popular thing, and everybody has to try the siren when they say, it's like, sounds awful, but that's where their interest is. And it's so important to let people explore that. And yeah, put up with 30 minutes of, the entire post-horn rank on at the same time, every key. Like, if that's what's getting these kids excited, great. They're not going to break it, just let them have at it. So that's how I think about open consoles in general.
And I would hope that, eventually that some groups should put on open console, sort of meet the theater organ events for the general public. And, once the people kind of get it out of their system after a while of, there's the initial shock of like, oh, I can make all of these sounds all at once. But once that wears out, if there's people who kind of want to come back to it, sort of gently guiding them towards, here's a piston, you can put your left hand here, you can play, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, the melody in your right hand on this keyboard, play the chord here, and just sort of see them get that satisfaction of like making music on this fantastically complicated machine.
Yeah, there was a kid, a little kid. He must have been like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old maybe. And he'd been watching me the whole performance, and I let him come up and play around with the instrument afterwards. And he sat down and he barely made a sound. He just had been studying me in the performance, and he had learned about which sets of stop tabs control which keyboard or play on which divisions. And he like sat there and would like scan the stop tab, he'd put down a stop, and then he'd press the correct keyboard. And he's like, oh, cool. And then he'd scan for another one, put down another stop, press that keyboard. Like his interest was not in making a bunch of noise. It was in figuring out what the layout of the console is. And I remember being like, oh, here, you want to hear the lowest note on the organ? And I like put down the 32s. And he just like wasn't really that interested. He was just like, oh, that's the pedal division. And then you put this. It's like, that's awesome. And if somebody got up and did that at an open console event, I think that's so cool. But nobody would want to sit there and listen to it. You know?
Stop me if I'm getting ahead a little bit. But like Luke mentioned, you know, meet the theater organ events and kind of going with Nathan's story a bit. How, like, I think an important question is how do we gauge how successful something like that is? You most likely aren't going to have you know, thousands of people, if not more, show up to chapter concerts all the time suddenly or attend chapter events. You most likely are just going to have people who are like, oh, that's cool, which is fine. I think it's important to keep that in mind going ahead.
Yeah, it's all, any type of engagement is valid. And, you know, like we said a million times before, I don't think concerts are the future of the instrument. I don't think membership organizations are how the art form is going to be supported long term. So, you know, if somebody just wants to show up and think it's really cool and then just remembers that experience for the rest of their life and never attends a single concert, that's fine. That means we're still achieving our goals in preserving and promoting the instrument because we've increased awareness.
And I think even at an open console or a concert, if a chapter gains members out of that because they're interested in hearing more and being the first to know the next opportunity that an event would happen, I think that is one of the best case scenarios. And I think even better is when somebody leaves something, tells a friend, and 2 people join. Then you're really spreading the word. And one of the topics that we will address at some other time later in the shows is about membership and chapters and what is the point of it? What does it bring to the large global scale of the theater organ community? But that's something that's going to eat up a lot of time. So we will do something with that later on. We've come up with a lot of ideas tonight on the future of the theater organ and how we can promote it better and what works and what doesn't work. So where do we go next?
I think that I think we need to expand our thinking and really acknowledge when there is interest, what that interest is and how that can be cultivated. And there's many applications for the instrument that we've already discussed: music in public spaces, pre-show entertainment, incorporating the sound of the instrument into orchestral performances, movie soundtracks, things where it's not the center of attention, that really gain a lot of traction but don't generate like membership and concert audiences. So I think we really need to focus on the effects that those types of presentations have and ways that we can continue doing that.
Just sort of making people aware of this thing as like a legitimate means of making music, as really a tool for musical expression, a tool for making music in backgrounds, accompanying orchestras, augmenting choirs, just really getting it out of the shadow of the 10 o'clock a.m. open console instrument and making it really a part of the larger musical world as a whole.
Looking at reevaluating the way it's currently presented, making it as welcoming as possible, and then once that discussion has started, looking at reevaluating how to how to come up with more opportunities to present it. Whether that be working with the theater it's installed in to see if, hey, you've got this really great organ here. Is there a way we can work together here to put it out in the public more often, not just chapter gatherings or other venues as well? But we'll look at reevaluating what's keeping the organ from being publicized even more than what it currently is, and how that can be addressed.
Basically, what everyone else was saying, exploring new ideas. And I think getting more enthusiasm just within our own group to sort of break out of the habit that we're used to. I mean, keep doing what we're doing, that's okay, but get a little more enthusiastic and find new things to do.
Enthusiasm is a huge driving point to the theater organ survival, and we have to be happy and we have to be proud about what we're doing and what we're championing. And encouraging chapters, encouraging members, encouraging individuals, both online, offline, and in person, really will make a difference when it comes down to whether or not we can keep going with this. Eventually, it's going to come to a point where we have to make a decision. Are we doing this for ourselves, or are we doing this for the community?
Yeah, and coming full circle to the first question of the video about Facebook discussion groups, I think we should remember that a little controversy is an indication of a healthy industry. So if there are differences of opinions or performers that are not traditional, that traditional audiences don't like, I guess I'm kind of just describing myself. Like, I think it's great to have like a palette of options and a variety of different examples of how the instrument is used, because it casts a wider net when we're looking to engage people. So a little bit of debate is a good thing.
Well said. Well, guys, thanks again for joining me. There's still a lot more that we can dive into, and I hope you'll join me again for what I'm going to probably say is part 3 of our conversations. And again, I thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for watching part 2 of the future of the theater organ here on From the Chambers. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Also, feel free to reach out if you have any comments, suggestions, or want to be on the show. I'll see you on the next episode.